First, let me introduce Jeff Skin Wade. So Jeff Skin Wade is now in his 11th full season as the Mavericks television analyst after joining the broadcast team midway through the 2008-2009 season. You know, with his unique style and in-game perspectives, Skin is a great complement to play-by-play announcer Mark Followell and fellow analyst, former Mav player Derek Harper. Skin started working with the Mavs, believe it or not. You look at him and you think that he's just a kid, but he started with the Mavs working with his partner, Ben Rogers, doing post-game analysis on the ticket back in 2002, of all things. So today, he and Ben, his childhood friend, they partner on a weekday show on 97.1 The Eagle from 2 to 5 p.m. every weekday. Skin is the quintessential local. He grew up in Richardson. He's a graduate of the University of North Texas and is a current resident of Allen, where he lives with his wife of 23 years, Tricia, and their two kids, Maya and Desmond. In his bio on the Mavs website, it says that Skin loves golf and beer equally, and is a partner in Roller Town Beer Works in Salina, Texas. It's a real privilege to have Jeff Skin Wade as our guest today. But before I turn the program over to Jeff for the start of, before I turn it over to Skin, he's going to make some introductory remarks. I've got to ask one question. Does anybody ever call you Jeff?
That's so what generally happens, my wife and my mother always call me Jeff. My mom actually calls me Jeffrey. And when people first meet me, they feel weird calling me Skin, because let's face it, that's weird. But then when they're around other people that are around me, they quickly realize everyone calls me Skin, and so they eventually start calling me Skin. The one little side caveat is my dad calls me Mose, because you mentioned that that I'm the quintessential local. My dad was the first basketball coach when Berkner opened, the high school I went to in 1971, I guess that was. He coached at Richardson High School, Lake Highlands. But in the mid-'70s, Moses Malone was a player that had just jumped from high school straight to the pros. And so he was sort of a basketball culture phenomenon. So he just started calling me Mose when I was a little kid. So him and his old coaching buddies call me Mose. My wife and my mom call me Jeff, and everybody else calls me Skin.
There you go. Well, that's great. Well, listen, why don't you take a couple of minutes, Skin, and just kind of frame what's happening in the Mavericks world right now, and then we'll have a whole series of questions for you after that.
Yeah, absolutely. At this time yesterday, I was actually on a conference call with the rest of the broadcast guys, Mark Followell, Derek Harper, and then our producer, Dave Keeney, and we were going over some things that are going to be coming up here, because this is certainly for everyone in every walk of life. This is uncharted territory. And what the NBA is attempting to do is pretty monumental. When you were reading, that I've been on the broadcast for 11 full seasons now, I sat there and I thought, so does this count as season 12? Because the amount of time that has passed since that night in March, I think that was March 12th, or maybe it was March 11th, when the Mavericks played their last home game. And I don't know if you guys remember, the Mavericks were the last NBA team on the floor that night. And the time that has passed from now until July 31st, when they tip that ball up, will be longer than a normal NBA offseason. So this is unusual in every single regard. And you can spend a lot of your day reading articles about how they're trying to execute this. I was just reading an article this morning written by the great Baxter Holmes. If you're a fan of long-form journalism pieces, he's spectacular. And he was working on, had written a piece about how they were deciding who the 5 barbers are going to be that are going to spend the next 3 months in the bubble. Because this is in the bubble, if you don't know, is in Orlando. 22 teams are flying to Orlando. Mavericks arrived yesterday right around this time. Today, several teams, the Milwaukee Bucks being one of them, are arriving. And then they try to get acclimated to bubble life. And then we start playing practice games here in 2 weeks or a week and a half. and then the games start July 31st. The 22 teams that are in the bubble have 8 games to not only get their legs underneath them and try to get that rhythm back, but also to change potential playoff positioning. For example, right now the Mavericks are the 7 seed. So if everything just started today, they would start the first round of the playoffs against the Clippers, who is the team that I personally fear the most. I think they're a wrecking ball of destruction. Lauren's team, the Houston Rockets, I believe, are the 5 seed right now, or maybe they're the 4. I'm pretty sure the Mavericks will catch the Rockets. We can all agree on that. But we have 8 games here with very little space separating 7, 6, and 5. So there could be a lot of jockeying going on as we figure out what the seedings are going to be. It seems pretty apparent that the Lakers will be the top seed in the West and the Clippers will be the 2nd seed. But there's 8 games to figure that out. And then we start playoffs, and even that will be unlike anything we've ever seen. I don't know how big NBA nerds we have on this call, but if you ever watch NBA Summer League happens in Las Vegas, and it's the rookies and usually 1st and 2nd year players. They all come together, and they play at the Thomas and Mack Center in Vegas. And people are in the stands, but it kind of has the feel of a rec league game, but you can hear sneakers squeaking on the floor, and it's not just a typical basketball environment. And we're about to watch the best players in the world competing to the highest of their abilities in a very unusual living situation in very quiet gyms. It's going to be surreal. So as the players are getting used to this, I think us as fans watching it, and I think we're all clamoring to watch this, it's going to be very surreal for us as well. And as the goal is, can teams get there, stay healthy, not only, with injuries and stuff, but obviously with the spread of COVID, there's several players that have had it. Can these teams recapture some sort of rhythm in 8 games and then go on a long playoff run? It's going to be very, very unique and I think fascinating just from a viewing standpoint. And we're going to be doing our broadcast. Me, Mark, and Harp are going to be doing the broadcast socially distant at the studios at Fox Sports Southwest. They're going to be sending us like 30 camera angles that national camera crews are going to, pick up and send back to the studio. And we're going to do our best to articulate the action in a way that we normally would, even though it's happening, 4 states over in a bubble city. So everything going into this is unique and fascinating. And I think of all the major sports leagues, I think the NBA is best prepared to execute this. I think because of the nature of the game, the way that they can control the environment. I mean, it's going to be wild. It's going to be very unique and bizarre. But I think of the 4 major sports, I think the NBA is probably best equipped to pull this off. And I think, when it's starting, I think, the NFL is going to be watching it really closely. How does this work? And if it goes off without a hitch, we'll have an NBA champion crowned sometime in mid-October. And then I guess we'll start the season, 2.5, 3 months later. And hopefully we've reached some place where we feel like the COVID-19 is controlled and people's lives can start getting back to some semblance of normality, whether it's sending your kids back to school, you guys all operating in the business world, how all that impacts. But I think all of us collectively really need, and not just want, but need the NBA and these other sports to kind of work to give us all, a boost, give the economy a boost, give people's feelings about what's going on a boost. And so, this is a really unique opportunity for the Mavericks to be a part of something I think they can have an incredible impact on our entire nation. Now, as for the way the team is constructed, Jalen Brunson is not playing. He had an injury towards the end of the year in that Atlanta game on his shoulder and had surgery, so he's not available. Dwight Powell had ruptured his Achilles. He's not available. And then Courtney Lee had a calf injury and had surgery on the calf during the hiatus, so he's not available. So if you guys remember last year, Trey Burke came over in the trade with Porzingis and Tim Hardaway Jr. The Mavericks are bringing him into the fold for some bench depth. But apart from that, the thing that'll be really fascinating to watch, and of course we're all pulling for this as Mav fans, except for Lauren, is can Kristaps Porzingis pick up where he left off? And he was already trending up in phenomenal fashion, becoming the player the Mavericks had hoped he would become when they traded for him. And then the Dwight Powell injury gave him more minutes at the center position, and he just exploded. On our conference call yesterday, we were looking at some numbers, and they're pretty astonishing of what he was doing towards the end of that run there. In his final 15 games, he was basically averaging 25 points, 11 rebounds, and 2 blocks, which are just dominant numbers. In fact, if your best player on your team is putting up those numbers, you're ecstatic. But in this case, as we know, he's the second best player on the team because Luka Doncic was having an MVP caliber year by every regard. He became the third player in NBA history to have a month where he averaged a 30-point triple-double. All this in his second year. And while it's still astonishing in these things, if you look at his career before he came to America, he truly was built for this. And I think the unique nature of the environment that the Mavericks are going in, I kind of think they have an advantage over some of these other teams because it's not like this team was built with a bunch of NBA playoff experience. And if you ask yourself, well, what is the benefit of NBA playoff experience? Well, it's knowing how to handle hostile environments and knowing how to go on the road. I'll give you guys an example. If you got caught up in the Last Dance documentary that ESPN aired about Michael Jordan, I mean, it was extraordinary, right? And people were talking about it. But one of the things that really stuck out to me is think about everything that Michael Jordan had been through in his career, everything that he had experienced, his alpha mentality. When towards the end of his career, when they were playing finals games in Utah, he didn't take his kids because the environment was too hostile. That is an advantage that is gone. Lakers don't have that. Clippers don't have that. Best teams in the East don't have that. And so when you're looking at a young Maverick team that you go, well, we hope we get some playoff experience, this is not normal playoffs. This is a completely different animal. And so I don't know that you can clearly say these teams, these veteran teams with all this playoff experience have any advantage over other teams. I personally don't believe that. I think these games need to be played and then we'll see. But why would a guy like Luka Doncic, who hasn't played an NBA playoff game but has won championships overseas, be intimidated by this situation? How is Porzingis, who's never played an NBA playoff game, how does he know any different? Usually when you have a young team that's coming into the playoffs, it's all right, we got to get our feet wet, and how do we handle this? I think all bets are off in that regard. And then I think we look at who are the best teams, how are they going to shine? And if you just want to – I don't want to put too much emphasis on stats that have happened, 3 months ago or 4 months ago by the time they play. But one of the stats traditionally that everyone uses to determine who the best teams in the league are is point differential. And basically what it is how many points a game do you score versus how many points do you give up. Now, there's also rating. You'll see that stat a lot. An offensive rating is how many points does a team score based on 100 possessions, because most teams have about 100 possessions in a game. And some people like that stat better because it shows offensive efficiency more than just bulk. But point differential. So the best team in the NBA usually has the highest point differential. If you average 115 a game and you give up 108, well, that's a 7-point differential, which is really high. The Lakers, as you can imagine, have the highest point differential in the West. The Clippers have the second, and the Mavs have the third by a wide margin. After that, it drops off almost 3 points to the Houston Rockets. So when people are doing these evaluations as who might shine in the bubble, the Mavericks are generally on people's list as a dark horse team that could rise up and really cause damage. And the point differential stat for the way that they played really underscores that. They also shoot the three ball really well, as we know, and teams generally get smaller in terms of their rotation, not only number of minutes, but size of actual players when you get to the playoffs. And so that's why when the Mavericks lost Willie Cauley-Stein, who's not going to the bubble for family reasons, they picked up a little guy, a guard, because Porzingis is going to be on the floor with Dorian Finney-Smith playing power forward, or even Luka playing power forward. So you'll see smaller, faster lineups trying to get up more shots, and it's going to be more about the number of points and the manner of the points that you can put up, as opposed to sort of grinded out style that the NBA playoffs used to be. So the Mavericks were really, really well positioned. I was talking to one member of the organization last week, and he basically echoed what I think all the insiders are saying is, how are we healthy? Do we have any players that don't get the virus? Are we containing the spread inside the bubble? Those are really going to be the conversations. You would think with this layoff, all the nagging injuries are gone. So physically, guys should be ready. Can they keep the virus off of their team? Hopefully the entire NBA can keep it out of the bubble, and the league doesn't have to deal with that. But I do know that we'll have, as soon as I'm done with you guys, I'm jumping on a call with Seth Curry from inside the bubble, and we're going to tape that and air it on a Mavs, I don't even know what to call it, preseason special, I guess mid-season preseason special. I don't know what we're even calling these things, but we'll have one of those with me and Harp and Followell leading up to that first game on July 31st. All 8 games will be on Fox Sports Southwest. We carry the first round of the playoffs as well. So, if you're a Mav homer like myself, you generally like to watch the local crew because we know more about our team than anybody else. And so we certainly encourage you guys to watch as many games as you can. The schedules are out now. You can find the time. Some of them are in the afternoon. So if you're still working, I know some of you might be working from home. If you're still doing that, you can probably pop the game on while you're doing your Zoom calls and other things. But I'm excited. I think the Mavericks are in a great position. I think it's going to be really fun and unique. And knock on wood, everyone stays healthy all throughout the league. And I think we can get back to watching a little bit of basketball and having some fun.
Great. Thanks, Skin. We really appreciate it. Thanks for that overview. And we'll, I'm sure, hear a lot more as we get into the Q&A. So, Jeff, do you want to go ahead and take it away?
Thanks, Ken, and thanks, Skin, for that update. First question from me, Skin, is can you give us a little bit of a preview of, let's talk basketball, thinking about some of the rotations the Mavericks will be using? You mentioned the bench might be shortened a little bit, and some of the players that won't be participating for injury reasons and other reasons. Talk about what you think we'll see from the team, and then talk about, do you think the Mavericks have an advantage with Coach Carlisle and having all the experience that he does and having won a championship before?
Yeah, I think that's probably Rick's greatest attribute, is reading a game as it evolves. I've always sort of referred to a basketball game as it's like a living, breathing organism that grows and evolves, and there's things that happen, and so you might have to adapt and change as the game goes on. And I think that's one area where Rick is really, his acumen really comes through. Most famously on their 2011 playoff run where they won the championship, going into the playoffs, Deshaun Stevenson wasn't a rotation player, and he started game 1. And it was great for them. And then he starts the whole series. And then suddenly in game 4 of game 4 of the NBA Finals, suddenly JJ Barea is starting. So, he seems to push the right buttons at the right times during these tense kind of situations. I think the most obvious difference, and it's injury related, is that, Kristaps Porzingis will probably exclusively play at the 5. There will be some situations where he's on the floor with Maxey because Maxey's a really versatile defender. But I kind of suspect the way they'll utilize those guys is, I think Kristaps will be more of the screen setter than Maxey. I mean, it's never concrete in all one way, but I think Dorian will get a lot of time at power forward. He and Maxey are the team's most versatile defenders. And if you're not a huge basketball fan, there's a term you'll hear as you're watching these games where broadcasters will refer to 3-and-D guys. And basically that started, first one that I can really think of being known as that is Bruce Bowen when he played for the Spurs. But the idea is that a guy is on the floor for defensive purposes, okay? But he can't be a complete offensive liability because then your spacing is compromised. The floor is too jumbled up, and it's difficult for a guy like Luka to get out in the ballroom and dance a little bit, right? So if you have a really elite defender, as long as he can hit wide open shots, wide open threes, usually in the corner, because that's the shortest three-point shot on the floor and also the highest payoff percentage-wise of a shot that you can take. If he can knock that shot down, then he's no longer an offensive liability because he doesn't compromise your spacing. And if you statistically look, usually, by the way, 3-and-D guys are wings, 6'7", 6'8", 6'9", rangy guys that can guard multiple positions. No one last year was talking about Maxi Kleber as a 3-and-D guy. But by the definition of it, he absolutely is that. And not only is he that, statistically speaking, if you look at three-point percentages, number of three-point shots that were made, and defensive ability, you could argue that Maxi Kleber and Dorian Finney-Smith are two of the 10 best 3-and-D guys in the whole league on the same team. So that gives the Mavericks tremendous versatility when it comes to rebounding, defense. Usually a bigger player like Maxi, where they run into problems, is when you have high screen and roll action and the bigger defender gets switched off on the smaller player because bigger players have a tough time keeping those little guards in front of them. Watch Maxi. He does not. And when he does get beat, he uses his size and his range and his quickness to recover to bother the shot. He's an extraordinary pick-and-roll defender, and it gives Rick a lot of versatility as to what he can use with his rotations because those mismatches on defense don't hurt the team. And then on offense, Maxi gives you an active player. He can crash the boards. He can get up. And then now that he knocks down shots. So in terms of layoff and rust, going into the regular season, no one expected Dorian and Maxi to put up the numbers that they did. They exceeded everyone's expectations. And so that's the biggest wild card to me is, do they pick up where they left off? And if those guys pick up where they left off, I believe in the Mavericks as much as I believe in anybody.
Right. Thanks very much.
Hey, Jeff,
Yes.
can I jump in real quick and ask
Yeah,
a
go
quick
ahead.
question or make an observation? So our board chair, Charles Elk with Encore, who's on this call, he and I actually went to that last game together.
Oh.
And so I guess you were talking about Kristaps playing exclusively in the at center now. What about the famous Boban? Golly, what a game he had against the Nuggets that night. And what about how Rick might use him?
Okay, that's a great question. And here is the beauty of Boban. So, and he's a beautiful man. So the Mavericks last couple of years, most teams have an end of the bench center, okay? Because the game has changed so much. I was just talking about Maxi getting switched off on a guard and keeping him in front of him. If Boban gets switched off on a guard, you got a problem. That guy's flying by Boban. So there's only certain situations and circumstances where Boban fits the flow of that particular game. The problem here is all of these men have egos, all of them. You don't get to that level without some degree of ego. And so if you're a guy that's at the end of the bench and not playing, it's not that uncommon for a guy to sulk and pout. And I really loved Salah Mejri. I think he's a great guy. He was friends with Luka because they knew each other from overseas. But Salah had a tendency to be upset when he didn't play for extended periods of time, which is totally understandable. You will never, ever see Boban sulk or express dissatisfaction or be unhappy because that's not the way he's wired. And that is, it sounds like a small thing. That is a tremendous asset to have a guy engaged with his teammates who may have gone 10 straight games without playing, and he's as engaged as he's ever been. He's loved by everybody. And then when you call on him, not only is he ready to play, he can do things like you saw against the Denver Nuggets. So Jokic, is a big kind of, now I don't know if you guys have seen the pictures of Jokic. He's lost a ton of weight. But Jokic is the kind of guy that he's a bully inside, and he can back – you don't back Boban down. Nobody's backing Boban down. So the point being is that he's a skilled player. He's just, he's very slow. But there are matchups where he's very valuable. That game you mentioned, that Nuggets game, was a great example of it. And so to me, when we signed him, I texted a guy in the front office and said, hey, tell me about Boban. And the first thing he texted back to me was locker room stud. He is a locker room stud. Everyone in the locker room loves him. They want to be around him. I don't know if you guys remember the game where the ball got stuck behind the backboard and Boban went up there and the arena erupts and Boban's pumping his fist, and you have this moment where everyone's enjoying being around each other. And they're around each other all the time. Derek Harper, who's one of my all-time favorite players, when he talks about, this is really great. We'll be sitting there during a timeout. The TV broadcast is off. And there's a team coming in town that's struggling. And Harp will look over there and he'll point out body language and how you can tell. He's like, you don't even have to watch this game and you can tell they're not playing. They're not connected. They don't love each other. And he's pointing it out because he's lived it. He's been in bad situations. He's been in great situations, like the Knicks that did go to the finals. And so these are all these sort of, abstract things that really, really matter to a team. And the Mavericks have a team where guys genuinely love each other and genuinely pull for each other. And that gives you an opportunity to do something special. And when we jumped on our call yesterday and we were just talking about the league, Harp just said, this team's connected. I don't worry about this team one bit. These guys are connected. They already have that connection. They don't have to go to Orlando and find it in 8 games. And that's a tremendous advantage. And part of that is having a guy like Boban that may only play 3 games out of an 18-game stretch, and his attitude and demeanor never change. So he's very valuable, especially the Lakers have a lot of big bodies. You might see him in those games. But yeah, he's the ideal end of the bench big. He's a really skilled player.
Great. Back to you, Jeff. Sorry.
Thanks, Skin. That's a great question. Always like hearing about Boban and what he's up to. Skin, talk to us next about how you're preparing to broadcast these games in such an unusual situation. Have you practiced doing that in this format where you're watching games on a TV as opposed to being there live?
So this will be unique. We've only done one thing like this, or I've only done one like this once before. The final preseason game of the year was in Vancouver, and we decided to air it. It was against the Clippers. And so they took the Clippers feed and they sent it back to us at the studios at Fox Sports Southwest, and we watched the feed and did the game. That was different, though, for a number of reasons. I will be on the pre- and post-game set, but the normal broadcast, there's very few broadcasts in the league that have 3 people. Usually my role would be what you would call a sideline reporter, and they chime in, but that's not what I do for this broadcast. I'm a second analyst. Harp is our lead analyst. He's got way more basketball knowledge because of his in-game situations and just his read on the pulse of things. And I'm here to add extra color, maybe some funny quips. I grew up in a basketball family. I understand the game, and I really follow the league, and I know a lot about it. But I'm color complement to Harp's lead color, right? So I'm not going to be broadcasting in the same room with them because we can't socially distance and do that. So I will be broadcasting from the pregame set, and so I'm going to have to be extra careful about picking and choosing my spots because I don't want to step all over Harp. So the answer to your question is I hadn't thought about it one bit until yesterday, and then when I learned how our broadcast situation was going to be, I was like, okay, I need to figure this out. So when we play our first game on July 31st, please forgive me if I make several mistakes. We're going to be feeling our way through it, just like the players. But Mark Followell, I think, is the best play-by-play guy of anybody in the NBA. I mean, and there's a lot of great ones, all due respect to those guys. But Followell's extraordinary. And he's done a lot of soccer matches where he's back at his studio watching it. So I think he's going to hit the ground running. Harp is perfect about, just vibing off of Followell. So don't worry about those 2 guys. If anybody's going to be making a mistake, it's going to be me in the first game. So that's just something I got to have to work through.
Great. Thanks very much. At this point, I'm going to open it up to questions from our attendees. And our first question is from Andrew Krause with Congressman Allred's office. Andrew, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Skin, for joining us on this. Like Jeff said, I'm with Congressman Colin Allred's office, represent North Dallas and some of the suburbs. Congressman Allred, also not a stranger to the professional sports, played for the Titans for 5 years. And he reps your alma mater, Berkner, as well as mine, J.J. Pierce. So a little connection there.
All right.
So I wanted to really quick ask more about a structure about the NBA. I know Cubes has been an advocate for pushing the season to later start date, like December or Christmas time, just because you got to deal with that three-headed monster of college football, NFL, MLB playoffs. So now with this situation, with the potential final game being in, I think you said mid to late October, and with the off season and then picking up in December, could you see the NBA potentially permanently moving, just from a business standpoint, not having to compete with those other sports, moving the start date to the NBA permanently to a mid-December, late December, Christmas time?
That's a great question. And let me just do a quick little name drop. My good, close personal friend, Michael Young, the all-time hit leader in Ranger history, put Colin Allred on my radar and is a big supporter of his as well. So it's very nice to virtually meet you here. But they need to, for exactly the reasons that you laid out. So hockey is a Canadian sport, right? The pulse of whatever that is going to be Canadian. So not only do I think it alleviates some of the pressure from football. I mean, I can't tell you how frustrating. I mean, I grew up here. I'm basketball first, second, and third, but I love my Cowboys like everybody else. And there's nothing more tense than the time that the Cowboys actually make the playoffs and waiting to see, are they going to put the game on opposite a Saturday night game of the Mavericks at the AAC? It always just drives me crazy. So not only would it get out of the way of college football and, of course, the NFL, but I think it also alleviates some issues with hockey because the playoffs usually start a week to 10 days apart. So if you push the start of basketball back to Christmas Day, and then that's going to be, that's basically a 2-month shift. Then once the Stanley Cup finals will be happening, and then the NBA playoffs would start. And if you look at that, so then the NBA finishes in August, and then traditionally pennant races heat up in August, right? I mean, just the way that it staggers would be perfect for the North American sports fan. I think it makes the most sense. And sometimes these extraordinary circumstances lead to change. And so I think now is the perfect time to pivot and never go back. I think it makes perfect sense. I also think it kind of creates more space for the NCAA tournament because the NBA playoff stretch, when does that happen? After the All-Star break. And so now you have the NBA playoffs or the stretch run heating up, going up against the Final Four in the NCAA tournament. So just from a spacing standpoint, I think it makes perfect sense. When Ben and I moved to the Eagle, we're not doing sports talk anymore. We're just doing general fun radio. But I know if I was doing sports talk 24/7, I would want that. That would give me, there would be no lulls in the sports calendar ever. It would be primo. And I think, Cuban's obviously been a strong voice in change in the NBA, and he's a big proponent of it. I think it makes a heck of a lot of sense.
Thanks again.
Absolutely.
Thanks again, and thanks, Andrew, for that question. Our next question is from Josh Mank with Texas A&M Commerce. Josh, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Should be unmuted now. Skin, we actually go way back to a series of 06 finals post-game calls from Josh's backyard that would have lasted about 35 minutes.
I actually remember that. That's great.
That was a little insane. My question, a little less X's and O's, a little less current, because I think you could talk about that for about 45 years going into the bubble. But outside of the Dirk retirement night and the 11 run, what's your best Mavericks kind of memory and moment? Because those two are too easy, so I took those off the table.
Yeah. So recently I had to submit like a 5 greatest Mavs moments, and it was really difficult to do. But so year 2 that the Mavericks were in existence, my dad got season tickets. So we were at Reunion Arena, section 116, row J, seats 7 and 8 for all of it, right? And so what happened was, you guys have at least, if you heard the story or know a little bit about it, when the Mavericks were in their first playoff series ever against the Seattle Supersonics at the time, they weren't even the Sonics, they were the Supersonics. There was a WCT tennis event at Reunion Arena. So they moved game 5, back then the first round was a 5-game series, to Moody Coliseum. And back then, I believe the Mavericks had 12,000 season ticket holders. The Reunion Arena held 17,007, but I believe 12,000 were season ticket holders. Moody Coliseum held about 10,000 people. So there were some season ticket holders that got squeezed. We did not. We were on the second to last row from the top of Moody Coliseum at midcourt. So I remember that. I was there for that. When they re-show those games, the camera well was opposite of where I was sitting. So, I mean, I have the memory of the Rolando Blackman steal at midcourt. I can still see it from where there's no bad seat at Moody Coliseum, but we were at the top and we were at midcourt. But I can still see it right there in front of me. And that was a time where, you guys remember, when Dirk and Nash and Finley beat Utah in the first round. That's this feeling of unlimited possibilities. And so that's kind of my go-to, because that was almost like a visceral experience. And it stayed with me forever. So that's probably that. There's a lot of great moments. I mean, obviously, one of my favorites is when Dirk and Tracy McGrady were putting on a duel and they dropped 100 points together at the AAC. That was just ridiculous. I was at I'll call it the Nick Van Exel game in the series. The Mavericks beat the Kings. I was working for the ticket at the time, and they sent me to Sacramento to cover it. And Arco Arena, the old Sacramento arena, was very much like a college arena where, most NBA arenas, I would say they're laid out more vertically. And it's kind of spacious. College tend to be very vertical as opposed to horizontal. And so you felt like you were on top of the court. And for Nick Van Exel, that was back when Sacramento fans were ringing the cowbell, if you guys remember that. It was ear-splittingly loud. And for Nick Van Exel to just destroy the Kings in their building, that was an incredible Maverick memory as well. So those things obviously all jump out to me. But I could fill it all with 2011, that 2-month run. I could give you 10 moments that stand out above anything else. So,
all right, favorite team for the Mavs to beat?
That I enjoy the most? Most people say the Spurs. For me, it's the Rockets. Sorry, Laura. I hate the Rockets on every level, which is painful because I love Moses Malone and Hakeem Olajuwon. I love those two guys individually. Those are great humans. But I don't know why Dallas and Houston has become so petty with one another, but I enjoy beating the Rockets. I enjoy that look on James Harden's face when he's all upset. I can be very petty in that way. So I actually enjoy beating the Rockets more than I enjoy beating the Spurs.
Thanks. I could ask a million questions, but I'll let other people talk.
And let me just throw this out right quick, guys. I need to jump on a call with Seth Curry at I probably should jump off here at 10:55 if that gives you guys some space there.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. That's our plan. Is we'll close it up right at 10:55.
You got it.
Our next question is from Grant with the Mavs Fans for Life. Grant, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, Ken. How are you doing?
What's up, man?
So before the All-Star break and before the shutdown, there were rumors about Tim Hardaway getting extended. Because of this whole thing, do you think he's going to be extended, or do you think he safely opts in instead?
That's a great question. I think that, generally when a player, agents and player and teams have good feel for what each other wants, right? Especially there's some agent, and I don't know off the top of my head who Tim's agent is. I'd have to look that up, but there's very few people in the league that have better relationships than Donnie Nelson. That guy is extraordinarily warm, and I'll tell you a super quick story. The guy who's running the New York Knicks now is a guy named Leon Rose. Leon Rose was LeBron's agent for a little while. And so when Leon Rose was a law student at Temple University, there was a player at Temple named Rick Brunson. All right. Rick Brunson was a point guard. Okay. And Leon convinced Rick Brunson, let me be your agent. Let me be your agent. So Rick Brunson was Leon Rose's first client. So he didn't have a place to go. So it's time to get on a summer league team. So Leon and Rick go to the Bay Area to get on the Golden State Warriors summer league team. And they sleep on the couch of a guy. Well, Leon sleeps on the couch of a guy named Donnie Nelson, who was doing international scouting for the Golden State Warriors at the time. And so that relationship goes all the way back to then. And then, of course, a couple of years ago, the Mavericks draft Rick Brunson's son, Jalen Brunson. And so there's a big reunion and all that kind of stuff. But Donnie's got a million stories like that where he goes back decades with people. So I'm saying all that to tell you that the agents usually know what the team wants and they can communicate really well. Tim has far exceeded everybody's expectations, in my opinion. And so sometimes a player will opt out of that last year of the deal, maybe take a little bit less. They know the salary cap considerations, and then they can come to an agreement as to what a long-term deal might look like. So I know that the Mavericks were interested in that. I don't know where those conversations went, but I think to your point, I think if Tim opts out, doesn't opt into that final year, it's because they're going to work out a long-term deal that makes sense for everybody.
Awesome. I hope so.
Yeah, me too.
Thanks, Grant, for that question. Next question is from Bob Trice. Bob, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Absolutely. Hi, Scan.
Hey, Bob.
I got two questions. They're both short and quick. Of the missing players, which ones will be missed the most in the playoff games for the Mavericks? Mm-hmm. And doesn't the issue of playing small ball give Houston the advantage since they don't have any size anyway?
Yeah, so that's I'll answer your first question. I think the answer is Dwight Powell, just because he was so incredible offensively in the pick and roll with Luka. The numbers are extraordinary. One of the stats people look at is points per possession for different types of possession. So I mentioned 100 possessions a game. If you're getting 1 point per possession, that ends up being really good. That's 100 points. If you're averaging 1.17, that's 117 points. That's extraordinary. So the Mavericks and every team in the league will chart specific possessions. What is the points per possession when Dwight Powell sets a screen for Luka Doncic? It's off the charts, like shattering NBA records type good. I don't have the exact number in front of me. So that's where he's really missed. And also he's a high character guy. Now, those guys are going to be there in the bubble in Orlando. They're there now. So his vibe will be felt, but on the court, I think he'll be missed. The Rockets question is fascinating to me. The Rockets tripled down on small ball. They weren't playing it earlier in the year. And if you looked, Russell Westbrook really kind of struggled to fit in. You know, they were doing a lot of taking turns. And then the Rockets traded their center. They brought in Robert Covington, who's 6'7", and he's playing 5. They committed to full-on Nelly small ball, like the way the Warriors played when they beat us in 2007. We have that horrible memory. And started doing that for about, I think it's about the final 12 games or so before the season was halted. But the interesting thing to me is if you look at the contracts of Russell Westbrook and Harden in the age of those guys, they truly have no choice. That is shoving every chip to the middle of the table. It's just where those guys are in their NBA lives and how much money the Rockets have committed to those guys. So they don't have a choice but to play, in my opinion, but to play that. And the numbers in the final weeks of the regular season, the Rockets started to take off, right? That thing really started to click for them. I think that this could be an environment where they're able to just pick up and go. But I think there's a lot of that remains to be seen. And I also think it's not like those guys have been committed to that for a year or 2 years or something like that. They made a change in about February. So it's still very new and even to them and to their concept. And also, you know, the way small ball really works is with efficient three-point shooting. And if you look like, I mean, I'm a Russell Westbrook fan. I realize he bothers some people. He's not an efficient three-point shooter. And so if they have a game or two where only Harden's hitting the threes or PJ Tucker or somebody like that, something like that, then they can really drop off. So I think they're an anomaly. I think it's very difficult to pin down what exactly they're going to be when these games pick up again.
Thanks, Ken.
Absolutely.
And thanks, Bob, for the question. I think we have time for one more question, and that's from Indria. Indria, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Certainly. Thank you so much. And thank you for having this meeting. So Mark Cuban and the Mavs recently facilitated a discussion on race and privilege in America.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know if there will be any outward demonstrations of that continued support by the team as they get ready to play in the bubble?
Okay, your question was a little muffled, but I think I understand you're talking about expressions or the movements that are going on and the Mavericks being involved in those things. One thing that's interesting is the players can choose to have a social justice slogan on their uniform. And I saw the numbers, I believe it was yesterday, more players have chosen to have the word equality on their uniform than anything else. Second is Black Lives Matter. One of the pride points for me personally for being involved in this league, aside from my love for this team and my love for this sport, is I feel like of the major sports and really of the major industries, the NBA is far ahead of the curve in terms of equality and opportunity for people and really elevating Black voices to be heard. And that's something that's very prideful for me because that's something I believe in. And I love being attached to this league hey, the league has a ways to go as well. They're not perfect in that regard, but I feel like they're leading the way. And you know, you look at our CEO, Sid Marshall, an African-American woman that had done great things in the corporate world and has now done great things for the Mavericks. And she's held some these gatherings where employees and people from different walks of life, Hinojosa from the school district was there, Police Chief Hall was there, and trying to get people together from different walks of life to communicate with one another and listen and understand one another. And I haven't been privy to meetings, but I can guarantee you that the Mavericks will continue to do that. They are committed to doing that. The people in the organization, that from the players to the people that work in the corporate offices, are all very committed to that. And the league will continue to be committed to that, as well as the WNBA, which, you know, they're at the forefront of that as well. So you'll see players in the bubble with certain slogans like equality and Black Lives Matter. I think they had about 20 to choose from that they could utilize that were approved by the NBA Players Association. But you will see them represent those ideas in Orlando, in the bubble, and moving forward, because that's really what this league is all about.
Thanks, Ken, very much. That was a great session. I'm going to turn it back over to Ken, but before I do, on your point with regard to Boban, I wanted to share a brief picture. My 7-year-old daughter, and I were at the State Fair last year, and we ran into Boban. And somebody was filming a segment. I think it was on Boban's YouTube channel, and he was playing all the different games, and he won this large sloth. And my daughter Sophie went up and played one of the games with him, and he helped her win this unicorn. And he was as nice as could be. So everything you said about Boban was very accurate, and appreciate you telling that story.
Well, not only is that adorable, the way that your daughter is hugging that, I'm colorblind. Is that a purple horse? I don't know what that is, but that is true love. Some
kind of purple, blue unicorn. And I can email you a couple other pictures that I think show this as well. So
yeah, by all means.
All right, and with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Ken.
Hey, thank you. And thanks, Skin. What a privilege to have you here today. We really appreciate it. We're sensitive to your time. I want to make sure you get to Seth and talk to him. But in the meantime, I want to just not only thank you and acknowledge you because we'll be making a donation in your name to the North Texas Food Bank for your participation today in recognition of that. So thank you so much for being here, and thank everyone for your participation today.